Okay. Good morning. I'm Tae-seung Lee, working for KrCERT of KISA. Today, it's very honor to make a presentation at Volcon conference. I will begin my presentation on registration guide on cybersecurity vulnerability enhancement. The presentation consists of three parts. First part, I will explain the analysis results of recent global cybersecurity paradigm shifting toward vulnerability. As second part, I will explain three-step approach for improving cybersecurity law on vulnerability. As third part, I will conclude with future work. In this slide, I will explain cybersecurity paradigm shift toward vulnerability, focusing on cybersecurity laws, policies, and guides recently published. Also, I will sequentially present in the order from US, EU, to OECD. Regarding US cybersecurity laws, cybersecurity vulnerability response is based on Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014. The act requires federal agencies to implement coordinated vulnerability disclosure and take measures on high-risk vulnerability. In 2020, the US enacted the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, which includes CVD requirements. Also, cybercrime is based on Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Regarding US cybersecurity policy, in March 2023, the US announced the National Cybersecurity Strategy, encouraging coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Also, US issued President Executive Order 14028 in May 2021. It requires federal agencies to implement a zero trust architecture and software supply chain security, which commonly include coordinated vulnerability disclosure. On May 2022, the US Department of Justice revised cybercrime policy on charging offenses of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Last year, AI roadmap and open source software security roadmap were published. The roadmaps include CVD requirements. Regarding cybersecurity guide, Secure by Design was published in October 2023. It urges technology manufacturers to implement vulnerability disclosure policy and vulnerability management. From this year, US Federal Communications Commission, briefly called as FCC, begin Cyber Trust Mark labeling rules. Cybersecurity vulnerability response playbooks describes the federal agency's response procedure on actively exploited vulnerabilities. Also, NIST CSF version 2 and KISA CPG version 1.1 include CVD requirements. Regarding EU's cybersecurity laws, Article 7 of NIS2, amended in October 2022, requires EU member states to adopt the vulnerability management policy as a part of national cybersecurity strategy. And the Article 12 of NIS2 requires each EU member state to designate one of its sisters as the coordinator for CBD. The Cyber Resilience Act, scheduled to be enacted this year, requires digital product manufacturers to implement CBD. Article 11 of CRA requires digital product manufacturers to vulnerability report to CSIRT within 24 hours after becoming awareness of actively exploited vulnerability. Also, the CRA requires digital product manufacturers to comply with the vulnerability requirements. The Article 6 of EU Cybersecurity Act, enacted in April 2019, requires ENISA, EU Cybersecurity Agency, to assist the implementation of vulnerability disclosure policies of EU member states. EU enacted Cybercrime Act on attacks against the information system in 2013. Regarding cybersecurity guides, the ENISA published reports regarding coordinated vulnerability disclosure. In 2022, OECD published 4 digital security guides, which recommend the adoption of CBD as national digital security strategy, vulnerability reporting of security researcher, and CBD implementation as digital product and service suppliers' duty. As a result of my analysis on cybersecurity laws, policies, and guidelines shown in this slide, I can find that coordinated vulnerability disclosure is commonly required or recommended as a way of enhancing cybersecurity. In this slide, I suggest a 3-step approach for cybersecurity law improvements on vulnerability. As step 1, I identify the recently introduced 7 requirements for enhancing vulnerability response. As step 2, to identify legal improvement requirements, I apply 7 requirements identified in step 1 to the Korean cybersecurity law titled ICN Act. As step 3, I suggest a preliminary draft of legal improvement proposal in initial working level. From now, I will explain step 1 in more detail. Through analyzing cybersecurity laws, policies, and guides of US, EU, and OECD, I identified 7 requirements for enhancing vulnerability response, which may need law-based regulations. First requirement is vulnerability reporting and notification. In US OMB's Memorandum 20-32 and KISA's Vulnerability Response Playbook specify cybersecurity vulnerability reporting procedure. In EU, the Article 11 of Cyber Resilience Act stipulates vulnerability reporting and notification obligation of digital product manufacturers. As part of implementing CBD, the Article 12 of NIS2 stipulates vulnerability reporting, and OECD is encouraging vulnerability reporting during vulnerability life cycle. Second requirement is vulnerability remediation. US OMB's Memorandum 20-32 specifies vulnerability remediation, and KISA's binding operational directive 19-2 require federal agencies to take measures against critical high vulnerability identified in Internet accessible systems. Also, CISA's binding operational directive 20-1 requires federal agencies to take measures against known exploited vulnerabilities, briefly called as CAV. In EU, the annex of CRA requires that newly discovered vulnerabilities must be handled through security update. And the Article 12 of NIS2 stipulates coordinated vulnerability disclosure and use vulnerability database. And OECD also encourages vulnerability treatment, including vulnerability handling or management. Third requirement is safe harbor for good faith security research. Regarding safe harbor, in May 2022, U.S. Department of Justice revised Computer Fraud and Abuse Act policy. The policy specifies that good faith security research should not be charged. And OMB's Memorandum 20-32 also specifies that good faith security research itself is not an incident or breach. In EU, Cybercrime Directive sets minimum rules, and some of EU member states adopt safe harbor by law or policy level. OECD also defines white hat hacker as security researchers. Fourth requirement is vulnerability disclosure policy, briefly called as VDP. The US OMB's memorandum and CISA's BOD require federal agencies to develop and publish VDP on their website. Particularly, BOD 20-1 specifies what contents must or must not be included in VDP. Also, I can find VDP templates and guides at DOJ, CISA, NIST, NTIA websites. In EU, ENISA published some reports for implementing VDP. Fifth requirement is CVD coordinator designation. In US, KISA plays a role as CVD coordinator for federal agencies, and in EU, the KrCERT designated by EU each member state plays a role as coordinator. OECD also recommends the designation of coordinator. The sixth requirement is the adoption of CVD as national cybersecurity strategy. The US National Cybersecurity Strategy includes CVD as strategic objective 3.3. The Article 7 of EU's NIS2 requires EU member states to adopt vulnerability management policy as national cybersecurity strategy. Also, OECD recommends the adoption of CVD as national cybersecurity strategy. As the seventh requirement, I can find the promotion and facilitation of CVD. From this slide, I will explain step 2. In step 2, I analyze whether or not the 7 requirements identified in step 1 are included in the South Korea Cybersecurity Law titled Information and Communication Network Act, briefly called as ICN Act. The act is one of cybersecurity laws in South Korea, and the act stipulates cybersecurity incident and vulnerability response in private sector. The table in the slide shows the current articles in ICN Act related to vulnerability. Article 47-4 stipulates KrCERT can take measures necessary for preventing cybersecurity incidents and precluding incident spread. KrCERT is operating bug bounty program based on Article 47-6. Article 48-5 describes cybersecurity incident response on IoT device, including vulnerability measures. In this slide, I briefly explain the coverage of ICN Act in the perspective of CCERT and PCERT. Though the main part covered by ICN Act is the cybersecurity incident and vulnerability response for ICT services. And additionally, the Act addresses the security of IoT devices and software. Currently, KrCERT is working based on ICT Act. This slide shows cybersecurity activities of KrCERT from cybersecurity incident prevention to international cooperation. In step 2, I analyzed whether or not the 7 requirements identified in step 1 are stipulated in the ICN Act. As a result of step 2, I find that 5 requirements from number 1 to number 5 in the table are not included or partially included in the ICN Act. On the other hand, I find that number 6, CBD adoption as national cybersecurity strategy, and number 7, the promotion and facilitation of CBD are included in the ICN Act. As a result of step 2, I identify 5 legal improvement requirements for enhancing vulnerability response. In step 3, I refer to relevant domestic and foreign laws and regulations. I analyze them and suggest a preliminary draft of legal improvement proposal in initial working level. In this slide, I suggest a new article draft titled Vulnerability Reporting and Notification. Regarding cybersecurity laws in South Korea, I refer to Article 48-3 of the ICN Act. It stipulates cybersecurity incident reporting obligation of ICT service providers. I also refer to Article 34 of Personal Information Protection Act. It stipulates reporting and notification obligation of personal information leakage. Personal Information Protection Act is similar to US GDPR. Regarding U.S. regulation on vulnerability reporting, I refer to U.S. OMB Memorandum 20-32 and KISA Cybersecurity Vulnerability Response Playbook. Regarding EU law, I refer to Article 11 of EU Cyber Resilience Act. It stipulates the vulnerability reporting obligation of digital product manufacturers. I also refer to Article 12 of NIS2. It stipulates coordinated vulnerability disclosure. As a result, I suggest the new article draft, which defines the entity reporting and notifying vulnerabilities and organization receiving the report and notification. Additionally, in paragraph 1 of the article, I specify the vulnerability types of reporting and notification, such as actively exploited and critical vulnerabilities. In paragraph 2 of the article, the deadline, method, procedure of reporting and notifying vulnerabilities shall be stipulated in the enforcement decree, which is sub-regulation of the ICN Act. In this slide, I suggest a new article draft for vulnerability remediation. For making a new article draft, I refer to Article 48-4 of the ICN Act. It stipulates cybersecurity incident response of KrCERT. I also refer to the US OMB Memorandum, KISA's BOD 19-2 and BOD 22-1. In EU, I refer to the annex of EU's CRA and Article 12 of NIS2. As a result, I suggest adding a new article draft titled Vulnerability Remediation in ICN Act. The article stipulates that the KrCERT can take measures for actively exploited and critical vulnerabilities. In paragraph 2 of the article, the deadline, method, and procedure of vulnerability measures shall be stipulated in the enforcement decree, which is sub-regulation of the Act. In order to make a safer harbor for good-faith security research, I refer to US DOJ's revised charging policy and OMB memorandum. They define good-faith security research for safer harbor. In ICN Act, I find that a safer harbor can be applied to the paragraph 1 of Article 48. As a result, I suggest adding a new paragraph for a good-faith security research that can be considered excluded from cybersecurity intrusion. In this slide, I suggest a new article draft for VDP. I refer to Article 30 of Personal Information Protection Act. It stipulates the establishment and the disclosure of privacy policy. I can find that the privacy policy and VDP are similar to each other in that the policies must be established and published on website. Additionally, I refer to US OMB's memorandum, KISA's binding operational directive, and VDP templates. Also, I refer to NISA's report on VDP. As a result, I suggest adding a new article draft titled Establishment and Publication of VDP. It stipulates ICT service providers and IoT device manufacturers shall develop and publish VDP on their website. In paragraph 2, it stipulates that VDP shall be compliant with relevant laws such as Cybercrime Law, Copyright Act, Patent Act, Personal Information Protection Act, etc. In paragraph 3, the publication method and content of VDP shall be stipulated in the enforcement decree. Regarding CVD coordinator designation, I refer to KISA's CVD program and Article 12 of NIS2. As a result, I suggest adding a new article draft which designates KrCERT as the CVD coordinator. In paragraph 2, I suggest the roles of coordinator shall be stipulated in the enforcement decree. In my presentation, I suggest a three-step approach for cybersecurity legislation improvement on vulnerability. Current status is initial working level, so more research will continue. As we saw in step 1, currently the global cybersecurity paradigm is shifting toward vulnerability. Although step 2 and step 3 are dependent on each country's legal system, but I expect that the suggested approach can be commonly applied to cybersecurity law enhancement. As future work, I will continue to research in comprehensive and in more detail, in perspectives of law and policy level, required or recommended, CRERT and PCERT, open source software, and high-risk AI system. Also, I will seek advices of legal experts and opinions of stakeholders. It's the end of my presentation. I thank you for listening. Thank you.